Listening to the political love episode yesterday, specifically the mailbag question, I think both you and your dad missed a possibility. You both took as given that there are laws that are true but cannot be followed. But I am reminded that our Lord addressed this specifically in the context of looking at a woman lustfully being the same as committing adultery with her in your heart, and the disciples being troubled and wondering then who can be saved. Our Lord responds, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Isn't the whole point of Christianity the formation of these new men for whom these erstwhile impossible things and these heroic virtues are actually possible? And as for mercy after falls, that's what confessional is for, although I understand y'all non-Catholics are missing that part, to some extent at least. Did I misunderstand the edge case you were discussing, and or am I onto something? Well, you're definitely on something, although I think that it might be an issue that's kind of adjacent to what we're talking about here. Um, the question my dad and I were dealing with had more to do with the enforcement of social norms within the church than the question of absolute salvation. Right? We both agree, my dad and I, that what you said, Peter, is effectively true. That Christ is working out a new man within us who is able to follow those unfollowable laws. And that's the man that he outlines in the Sermon on the Mount when he talks about the kind of person who not only doesn't do anything wrong, but has an inner desire that is oriented toward the good. Now, you can disagree with me about this, and maybe y'all are much better, more moral Christians than I am, but I don't think this is possible to perfect this side of heaven. I think we are striving toward that as a final goal, but that ultimately it will only come into being after the resurrection. And so, when you talk about this sort of inward reorientation, which is the whole point, I totally agree with you about this, right? That is what we're trying to do. We're trying to step by step reshape ourselves into that new man, right? The church in this life is still going to have to encounter people, 100% of people, who don't live up to that internally, right? It's still going to, because this is not a realizable thing in the here and now, even though it is the ideal toward which we strive, we still end up with that unfollowable rule divide, right? We still end up with that discrepancy between what the law of the new covenant actually is, which is really an Aristotelian remaking of the inward desire, right? We still end up with the discrepancy between that and what is actually possible to enact in the here and now. And yes, we go to confession when we fall short of that, but we also are constantly, I mean, we're falling short of that every 5 seconds, right? Especially the lustful one is a good example, right? It's like one of the things that does is it shows us how deep sin goes, because when we hear that, we think, man, the inner man is constantly just striving toward that, and there's almost nothing you can do to stamp it out. You can pray and work to let that reformation, that reformed man, in on your life, right? And to identify yourself with the reformed man and not with the old Adam, which is passing away. But again, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that you in your heart have stamped out all those lustful desires, but I don't. I'm skeptical. I think that that's the point of those statements, is not to insist that that's how you should make yourself in this, that's how you're going to make yourself in this life, but rather to show you the outline of what you're traveling toward, both so that you can point yourself in that direction and so that you can understand how deep the problem goes and how much you are in need of mercy and of Christ. So I think we still end up then with the fundamental kind of question about how then shall we live, right? What shall the church do? How shall it regard these rules and enforce them or not? Because that discrepancy is always going to be with us. I hope that makes sense.